Hi, I'm Woody. I'm a developer at Jetpack CRM, and I'm going to walk you through changes added to the CRM in November 2020. First up, we're going to look at the core. This is a demo data site I've got here, so none of the numbers are real. But if we have a look at this list view, you can now order any list by any type, any header. So in this case, we've got things like transactions total. I can click. And what you'll see then is it's ordered by that transaction total. And that works for any of these fields we have here. If you had any custom fields, they'd show up here and you could sort by them. Perhaps we can put transaction count there. Let's see if that's, let's reload it. So now we can order by transaction count. We had some of this before, but now we've got full support for all fields across contacts, companies, quotes, invoices, and transactions. Next up, we've got invoicing. What we've added here is this extra button, which you'll see across the CRM if you're an admin, which jumps you straight to the settings. And this is the setting that we're going to talk about. For those of you who already have data in your CRM, this will default to manual input, this setting. And for those of you on fresh installs, it will default to this auto-generated invoice reference. And what this is something like the Invoice ID or the reference, depending on where you are, you call it different things. And this more complex setup comes from our custom fields auto number, custom field type. And what it lets you do is set a invoice ID which matches a kind of pattern. And in this case, we've got a prefix which says HQ dash, and then the next number, which we could change 2000, for example, and a suffix. And what this will do is when an invoice is saved, it will generate a number based on these parameters. And another addition we've added is that you can now rename what reference, which by default is reference, how you define an invoice label, basically. Personally, I'm more used to calling it an invoice ID, so I'll change that. And these all have an effect throughout the system. So when I go to add an invoice ID, it's telling me it's going to save it probably to that number. I can add a test example of £1,000. When I save the invoice, it's now generated me a new invoice number. And if I was to add another, it would increment that and it would be HQ-2001. And this is shown throughout, whether it's on the PDFs or the portal or the emails sent out to the end user. So that's the invoicing. Next up is the companies. We've added a few things to this. So by default, in this case, it's showing me as organizations. But by default, we used to have companies disabled. We didn't think many people were using it. But in fact, we've checked, and a significant proportion of you enjoy using this B2B mode, is what we've called it. So we've enabled that by default. You can turn it off, and I'll show you how in a minute. But we've also added to the settings a more complete version of this setting, which allows you to change the label for a company. So in some cases, like a non-profit situation, perhaps you may be dealing more with organizations than companies, in which case you could simply change this to organization. And as you can see here on the menu, everywhere companies were defined before will be called organizations now. In this case, I'll put it back to company, which will have effect when I refresh, so I can see that. And where we manage the other change here is where you manage B2B mode has changed. It's gone from being on the settings page, quite hidden, to this extensions page, which if you haven't seen it already, is where you manage paid and free extensions. And these extensions are all built into the core and can be enabled and disabled just by clicking. So in this case, we'll turn it off. But in fact, I want to use it, so I'll turn it back on now. But that's how you enable or disable companies from this menu from now on. So other than those key areas, I think there's lots of other fixes we can show you. I'll just jump to the list. So if we look at the product update post, we can see what else has changed. Most of what's new we've covered in this video, which consists largely of being able to sort the list views better. There's some improvements I'd like to highlight. Firstly, we added better support for checkbox and multi-select custom fields, and this is added to the API connector and to the other connector extensions like for Contact Form 7 or Gravity Forms. This means that you can pass multi-selects much better through these plugins, which is a big win, really. That was something we were missing. The next big one that's useful is you can search properly by ID in all of these areas, from transactions to companies. That's a no-brainer. The other major thing that was asked for a lot was to fix up the event notification emails. They were not firing for some users, but they were needing a lick of paint anyway, so they've been improved, and there's some few other things there. And then if we look at the fixed list, there's a lot here, lots of little things really, and they're on the edge of improvements, some of these. But I'd just like to say thanks for everyone that supports us by reporting bugs. It really helps. We really do fix things as quickly as we can, and it really helps if you submit bugs reports through the knowledge base. We have a submit bug reports form there. That really helps everyone, really, because then we can fix things as soon as they come up. Thanks for watching this November 2020 update, and I'll see you next month.